Now we will take a moment to introduce you to our speakers. Our speakers today are Erin Trask and Ben Evey. Erin is a senior manager on Raymond's Public Sector Finance and Accounting Solutions team. In her role, she provides Chief Financial Officer services, consultation, report preparation, and department oversight to public sector clients. Ben is a Director of Professional Services on Raymond's Technology Solutions team. He leads the professional services and project management teams and provides strategic direction for engineering across all Raymond offices. Erin, you may begin the presentation.
Thank you, Ashley. Here's our roadmap for what we're going to cover today. We have a lot of content, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we jump into the actual content, though, we wanted to take a minute and talk about why is this topic important. And current and future staffing shortages are definitely one of the reasons that we need to think about leveraging technology. So there are 340,000 fewer accountants today compared to 5 years ago in the United States. And the AICPA has stated that roughly 75% of its members are at retirement age. So we're going to have to learn how to do the same level of work with less people. And we need to also think about the capacity and effectiveness of our current workforce. So a study from Stanford University found that productivity per hour sharply declined when a person works more than 50 hours per week. So the answer to the staffing shortages is not going to be simply having people wear more hats or work more hours. We need to figure out how we can work more effectively and more efficiently. Another thing that we need to consider as public sector organizations is budgetary constraints. How can we be good stewards of the resources that have been entrusted to us by our communities and maximize the value that we can provide through the budgets that have been approved by our governing bodies?
All right, so why else is this topic important? All right, obviously we have lived in a post-COVID world for a few years now, and the pandemic changed how we use technology, how we interact, and how we work in this remote world. If you remember back to 2020, people were sent home with no notice, right? IT departments were told, just make this work so people can work remotely, and they did. New infrastructure was stood up as quickly as possible. Band-aids were slapped on things were put in place to allow people to keep being productive from home. Some were good, some were not, but it presents some questions, right? Do you even know what you have? When this happened a few years ago, things were happening so quickly, things were going up so fast, you might not even realize some of the solutions that were put in place. And along with that, are you fully utilizing what you're paying for? So as we look at this, and as we go through the presentation, we're going to be covering some of this, but a fact that's going to remain with us is that hybrid work, remote work, it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And in this new world, we need to learn to work within that from an IT perspective as well. So let's talk about that a bit. Leveraging existing technology resources. And this is how to make the most use of what you have. And we're going to start with Microsoft 365. As we talk Microsoft 365, I think the first question to ask is, what is Microsoft 365? What are we talking about here? Well, what I'm talking about is the unified ecosystem, which is Microsoft 365, working with Microsoft Azure at its core, working with Entra ID, which used to be called Azure Active Directory for your user identity in the cloud, and how all that works together. So in this ecosystem, applications and data are integrated as well. So you have Teams, you have SharePoint, OneDrive, Outlook. All of these things can talk to each other and pull data from each other, as well as non-Microsoft applications outside in the cloud. If you set up the correct APIs, if you configure these correctly, they can all talk together in a holistic way. Microsoft 365, it encompasses so many different applications and ways of working. It's really hard to keep up with the constant changes from Microsoft. New features are integrated and announced every day. So you have to ask how much new functionality has been introduced that you and your user base might be missing. What's something new that's come up? I'm going to leave it to Erin to talk a bit about it.
Thanks, Ben. So we're going to try to offer a few practical examples through our webinar, things that you can take away on how to be more effective. And so one of the things that you likely already have in your tech stack that you may not be utilizing is scheduling tools, sometimes called Find Time, in Microsoft 365. So I know all of us have been part of email chains regarding scheduling meetings where people send around their availability. and it clutters up your inbox. It's a task to go back through and track things. Things might get scheduled over by the time you get to the end of the email. And so this is a simple tool that we can leverage to be more effective and more efficient. We can use a scheduling tool. It will look at the calendars of everyone within your organization and recommend times based on availability. We can set it up to auto schedule the meeting once everyone's responded to the pool. We can allow respondents to add other people to the pool. And so this is just an effective and efficient way that we can do something smarter and faster. And so we want to give some of these practical ideas of little ways that you can save time throughout your day. And with that, we are going to have our first polling question of the day, which is, how confident are you in using Microsoft 365's collaboration tools? So we'll give everyone a minute to respond to that, but we are going to keep moving with the presentation while you respond. So we are going to start here with talking about collaboration in SharePoint, Teams, and OneDrive.
Okay, so more questions, right? So let's look at what collaboration can do for us. If you think back to the olden days of IT, we were emailing files back and forth. Why are we still doing that, right? How often have you gotten an email that says, "Hey, there's a document attached. Can you check this out and then send me your changes?" That works kind of, but what you're left with is a lot of back and forth in email. You get a lot of these questions about who has the newest version. I don't know. Maybe I edited an old copy, but now there's a newer one out there. What a mess. Not good, right? So when you look into Microsoft 365, now you have all this integration. You have OneDrive, for example, for sharing documents, or Teams. You can put a document out there and say, all right, Aaron, I want to collaborate with you on this document. I can pop it into a Teams chat, or I can share it out of my OneDrive. Now the two of us can have the document open on our computer and do real-time authoring together, where we can see each other's changes. I'm sure you've used this before, either in Google with Google Docs or in Microsoft 365. You may have seen some of that, but that relies on those documents being in the cloud for that to work. The nice thing about this, you can edit from any device, right? You can sit there on your laptop, your phone, your tablet, or even just in a web browser and get to this stuff. And there's version history built in. So as you're arguing about what was in the latest version, or hey, did someone pull something out, 3 days ago, you can go back and roll back in the version history and see that stuff and do proper tracking of changes and proper rollbacks as needed. The underlying technology for all of this is Microsoft SharePoint. SharePoint underlies Microsoft Teams, Microsoft OneDrive, and all the other stuff that allows for this document collaboration. And there's some additional functionality in SharePoint that you might not be aware of.
Thanks, Ben. So as finance professionals, sometimes we get a little nervous when we say, we're going to give everyone access to this document, right? We're going to collaborate in real time. And we think back to controls that we want to have in place. And so I wanted to highlight some functionality that is available in SharePoint you may not be aware of, that can help us ensure that appropriate controls are being maintained as we shift to this digital collaboration environment. So one is document sign-off. There's different ways that you can send things out for approval. People can get an email with a link to the document. They can approve things right from their email to have that documentation that a document has been approved, it's been signed off on. We can leave review notes. So within a file, we can use a comment functionality to have conversations. We can resolve comments once they've been addressed. We can add notes in the browser field at the file level. We can get notified when there's changes to a file to kind of track what changes need to be made, when changes have been made. We can also restrict access to files. So maybe we don't want to collaborate. We want people to be able to access a file, but not change the master. So we can also set up restricted access, either at the folder level or the file level itself. We can check out a file, maybe if we're not the owner, or if you are the owner of a file, you can set it to be view only. And so leveraging some of this functionality, we can establish and maintain internal controls inside of our collaborative document. And so now we're going to shift into optimizing workflows, continuing on this theme of using this 365 platform. So when we talk about optimizing workflows, the first step is sitting down and doing a review of your workflow. What processes do you currently have in place that are manual? Where are you still printing things? Where are you still emailing things to each other? Identify those manual repetitive tasks that could be automated. Pick one or two of them to start with, and then evaluate your tech stack capabilities to see what solutions you might have that can solve that problem. Or if you don't have a solution, evaluate technology outside of your organization to see if there's something that makes sense for you to implement. Once you've identified a solution, you also want to consider the cost benefit analysis. And when we think about the cost benefit, there is the cost of implementing an automation. Maybe you need to send a staff person to training, or maybe you need to hire an organization to come in and set up the automation for you, or maybe you need to purchase new technology. And so that's certainly a factor and a part of the consideration. But I want to challenge us to also think about what is the cost of not automating that task. So if you continue to have your staff person do that manually, on the face, it may look like, oh, that's costing me $0. But think about what other things could that staff person be doing with their time, and how much time are they going to spend doing this task over the next year or the next 5 years that they could be doing other things to add value to your organization and accomplishing a different task. And so can you reduce the amount of staff that you need by leveraging technology? As we have been talking about, we started talking about staffing shortages. How can we use our existing staff to do the same level of work or more by using technology? A practical example of this for an organization where I serve as the CFO is credit card activity. So we have a client where I serve as the CFO, and they had a software that allowed them to electronically route credit card activity for approval. So users could attach their activity and code it and submit it to their supervisor for approval. The technology was very clunky. It was not intuitive, and users didn't like using it, didn't find it easy to use. And so we consistently found that activity was not getting routed. It wasn't getting approved and making it to finance. And so this was a significant challenge. Finance was constantly following up with users. Users didn't like using the system. So we sat down and we said, let's just brainstorm. How can we do this better, make the experience better for the users and better for our finance department? We looked at what is our existing tech stack, budgetary constraints, and the impact it would have on staff. So we didn't want to go out and purchase yet another system to invest additional cost, but also have staff to have to learn another system. And so what we ended up implementing is an Excel-based macro book. And so in this macro book, we were able to identify initially on the input tab who the users are and their contact information. We could quickly import or paste in the credit card activity from the statement. And then we could just click a button to run a process to generate expense reports. So down below, we have what the expense report looks like that was generated as an output. So this takes all of 2 minutes to paste in the data, run the process. It generates an output separated by each user. The activity is pre-populated. All that they need to enter in is the business purpose of the transaction, select the object that related to the activity, as well as the department it should be coded to. The template also pre-filters the accounts and departments based on the individual's role within the organization. And so this process easily generated the files. We could also click a button to generate the emails and attach the files too, so that it would get sent out to users in a very quick and efficient manner on a monthly basis. We received very positive response from the end users that this was much more intuitive and easy for them to use than having to log into a system. And then when they sent the files back, we had a Power Automate workflow that would save down all those attachments in a specific folder. And then we had this compiler document that was created. And so we could simply click a button here to compile the expense reports. It would open all the expense reports saved in a specific folder and compile them into one file. And then we could run another macro to create the journal entry. And so that macro would go through and look at the activity, which statement it related to. It would separate it into different entries based on the credit card statement it related to, use a specific posting date, a specific entry description, and put it in a format that could be pasted or uploaded into the general ledger system. And so by leveraging these tools, we were able to improve the overall end user experience, as well as create a lot of efficiencies for the finance department. And from here, we are going to go into polling question number 2. This question is, do you currently use any automated processes to streamline your workflows? And from here, we're going to talk about enhancing productivity and efficiency. And one of the ways we can do that is becoming more efficient in Outlook. It's a tool that all of us use every day. If you don't use Outlook as your primary email source, many of this functionality exists in Gmail or other systems as well.
Right. So let's talk about Outlook a little bit. There are some things in Outlook that you can do to maximize your use of the tool and make you more efficient and effective in email. And some people have used Outlook for a long time and they haven't even thought about these things. Some people use them regularly, and I think we're going to have a mix in the audience. But these are just a few things that are common in there. So Outlook rules are something that have been around for a long time. Many people already use them. We're going to go through just a little bit of how those work. Outlook categories are not quite as well known. And then Outlook Quick Steps, I would say most people don't use. And it's a tool that's out there that you should know about. So let's kind of go into it a little bit. Outlook rules, these are Outlook's automation, right? And these are automated things that when something happens, we're going to do something. If this happens, then do this. So as an example, you can say any email that comes in from our reporting system or from our ERP or whatever that's got this subject or that's got this sender, I'm going to automatically send that to a reports folder in my inbox. You can make a rule where that happens automatically. You have to do nothing, happens in the background, and it's done. You can flag or mark important emails. So maybe every time your boss emails you, you want your boss's email to be flagged as important. Maybe you even want to flag it as a follow-up. You want to put the little red flag on there that says, I need to deal with this later. That can be done with a rule. And then automatic replies. What's interesting about this one is this is one rule that almost everyone has used because the out of office settings in Outlook basically are an automatic reply rule, right? You can set it up where when you're out of the office, anyone who emails you gets a message back that says, hi, I'm Aaron, I'm on a beach somewhere, and I'll be back in a week. You can do that with any kind of email, and you can do that with any kind of reply. So you can have it be where certain emails from certain annoying vendors that you don't like come in. You can set up an automatic reply that says, I'll get back to you within 2 weeks. You know, maybe an important email comes in from someone that you're critically working with. You can say, I will get back to you much sooner than that. And then inbox cleanup is another good example, right? Archiving old emails, you can have a rule that says anything over 6 months old automatically gets archived. I'm probably never going to do anything with that. These are all things that can happen automatically. Which brings us to categories. What are Outlook categories? If you've ever used Gmail labels, they're very similar with some differences. So categories are color-coded and they can apply to emails, contacts, calendar items, whatever it is. So you might have a category that you want to apply to anything to do with a certain project you're working on. They all get the same category applied, so you can easily identify them. Maybe you want to categorize by priority. Top priority items are going to be red, yellow for medium priority, and purple for low priority, whatever that looks like. Or you can color code meetings and appointments. To me, this is probably the most useful one. If you pull up your calendar, by default, everything is blue, but you can use categories to maybe say client meetings are going to be purple and internal meetings are going to be brown. Maybe personal time is gray, whatever. It lets you pull up your calendar and at a glance get a good idea for what your layout looks like. And of course, you can use Outlook rules to apply categories automatically if you would like. Quick steps. What are Outlook quick steps? So if you look in your toolbar at the top of Outlook, and this is a snapshot from new Outlook, it's also an old Outlook, there is a quick steps thing that most people just leave blank because they don't know what it is. Well, it's a way to automate multiple steps. So sometimes you have to do something over and over again on a certain type of email, and you want to make that more effective. You could make a quick step, as the example says here. Maybe you have an item in your inbox, you click it, you click the quick step for it, and it sends a reply, maybe saying, I got your message, I'm working on it now. You can apply a category, you can move it to a folder, and maybe you have the meeting schedule pop up that allows you to then set up a meeting. So these are things that if you do these over and over again, anything that's regular and repetitive, you might consider capturing in a quick step. If it's a tool you haven't played with, check it out. But as we're talking about being more effective, the big thing that we need to look at is how Microsoft is integrating tasks into various parts of Microsoft 365. If you haven't tried Microsoft To Do yet, get the app, install it, and give it a shot because it can take your task management to the next level. If you're using your inbox as your to-do list, and I know a lot of people do, you've got all your flagged items in there and you're going to work them top to bottom or however you want to do that. That's fine. It's a good way to get started. Nice thing about To Do is that it will pull all those flagged items automatically into To Do, and now you can do more with them. You can assign them to different projects. You can go ahead and you can organize them with due dates. You can put reminders on them. You can add notes. You can also create new tasks that aren't from a flagged email. You can create like a weekly task. Maybe there's a report you have to send every Friday by noon. You can create a task that puts it on your to-do list every Friday morning. Great, that's fine. Collaboration is the huge thing with Microsoft To Do. So if you're part of an enterprise, everyone's using 365, you can now share different lists in Microsoft To Do with your colleagues. So everyone is working on the task together. Everyone can add comments and notes, can check off what's done, and it's all there for everyone to see. Just a great way to combine forces and get through these tasks that you have to get done. And as I said, it integrates all over the place. We've talked about how it integrates with Microsoft Outlook, but Microsoft Planner is the other thing that it integrates with. You can, if you've never heard of Microsoft Planner, it is a tool that's kind of the next step in organizing, right? It's basic project management. So it sits somewhere between Microsoft To Do and full-on Microsoft Project, but it lets you, you can organize your tasks and you can manage projects, small ones in Microsoft Planner. It has Kanban board functionality. You can do Gantt charting with the right licensing. It's just a useful tool. And the tasks in there can flow back and forth between To Do and Planner, which is kind of neat. And then Power Automate is another one. We'll go into more of this a little bit later, but you can create new tasks in To Do based on triggers, like a new email comes in or a certain kind of Teams message. Power Automate can say, all right, I'm going to make a task to do something with that. Just all kinds of custom workflows that make it handy. So a lot of technology out there, very useful. Think about it.
So as we're thinking about leveraging tools like Outlook, I want to just take a moment and talk about a few tips that we need to think about on how to be productive and effective when we're using those tools. And one is appropriately prioritizing email among tasks. So how many of us have started our day opening our Outlook, we get into our email, all of a sudden we look up, 3 hours have gone by, right? Email can become kind of a black hole of our time. And so we can take some small steps that just set our frame of mind and help us to appropriately prioritize email among other tasks. Because email probably isn't, it's definitely not your only task and probably isn't your most important task, even though I think a lot of us could spend all of our day there. And so one quick way that we can do this is in the settings to Outlook, you can change Outlook to open your calendar by default. So you can have it open your calendar view. You can also have your tasks and to-do items show in that calendar view. So you'll have a list of all your meetings for the day. You can see your tasks and to-do lists that are assigned with the due date today that you have planned to accomplish. So you can start with the right frame of mind on what you need to accomplish and how you need to get things done. Another thing that we want to think about is turning off email notifications. So by default, we get bombarded with notifications from Outlook. They come up on our phone, they pop up in the corner of our screen, we get a sound when we get an email, and all of that can serve as a distraction during the day. So email usually is not an emergency. It's not something that we need to look at and respond to immediately. If there's an emergency, hopefully your team is calling you on the phone or sending you an IM or using some method other than email. So I'd like to recommend that everyone turns off those email notifications. A Harvard Business Review study found that on average, the cost of a switch is a little over 2 seconds, which doesn't sound like a much, but they found that the average user switches between data sets, different apps and websites nearly 1,200 times every day. So how many of us have gotten to the end of the day and we have 10 Excel spreadsheets open and 5 half-started emails and multiple web browsers? We know that we're switching back and forth through things a lot during the day. So they found that people in the job studied spent just under 4 hours a week reorienting themselves from toggling to a new application, Over the course of the year, that added up to 5 working weeks or 9% of their annual time at work. So the more we can minimize toggling between apps and getting distracted, when that email pops up, we are thinking about and probably spending more than 2 seconds thinking about, who did it come from? What is it about? Do I need to respond now? How do I prioritize this? And so if we can appropriately schedule time to focus on tasks where we're not getting distracted by those notifications, and then schedule time on your calendar to look at email and work through, it's not that you're not going to spend time in your email, but prioritize it appropriately. Block out time during specific points in your day to check your email, and then don't let it be a distraction. Can really help you to be more productive and effective. And so from here, we're going to talk a little bit more about automation and artificial intelligence that we've been touching on. So Ben mentioned that we were going to circle back to Power Automate. This is something likely many of you have heard the name of, but probably a lot of you haven't tried out using yet. It is included in many Microsoft 365 license platforms, so your organization may have access to this. And this is a way that you can automate routine tasks within Microsoft 365 platforms. So I have a couple of examples here on the screen of templates that are available from Microsoft. You can also build your own flow. And if you're not comfortable in building your own flow, but there's not a template, you can leverage Copilot or other generative AI platforms to help give you instructions for writing those flows. So here's an example of just a couple of different manual tasks that can be automated. One is the example that Ben had used of if you get an email and it's asking you to do something, it automatically creates that task for you.
All right, so as we talk about automation, you can't talk about automation anymore without talking about artificial intelligence. So everyone has got some familiarity with what AI is. Obviously, ChatGPT was the first big one on the scene that really hit the industry and made a big splash with regular everyday folks. If you haven't tried ChatGPT, you're behind. You need to at least get in and give it a shot. So the nice thing about ChatGPT is that if you're using Microsoft Copilot, Microsoft has an agreement with OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, to include that technology in Copilot. So if you're using Microsoft Copilot, that AI platform is based on the same as ChatGPT. When you're using it with an organization, as long as you're logging into Copilot with an Entra ID login, which is something in the cloud, you're not logging in as a normal user on the internet, but you're using your work ID, you automatically get Microsoft's enterprise data protection. That used to be a separate kind of license and setup. No more. It's just automatically on there. And it allows you to use Copilot in a way that is a little safer than just if you're throwing stuff out onto the public internet into ChatGPT. It's a little bit more protected. Microsoft has some lockdowns in place around that. That's not enough to keep you protected, though. You really want to talk about having an AI acceptable use policy. So if you don't have one of these already, you need to consider it. An AI acceptable use policy is going to provide clear guidelines for ethical and responsible use of AI. It should be aligned with your organization's values and principles. And primarily, a good policy is going to mitigate risk and safeguard your data, especially if you have PII. That is very easy to accidentally throw out into an AI system out on the internet. You want to make sure you have a policy in place that tells users that is not acceptable. Here's the safe way to do it, or don't do it at all, depending on what your policy says. There are lots of templates out there on the internet for this kind of thing. So if you're looking to develop an AI acceptable use policy, you can get a head start, or you can get assistance from Raymond or other providers on how to do this and how to make it going. If you want to learn more about AI, we did publish earlier this year an AI webinar series called Thriving with AI. The link is here on this slide and will be also made available later. A 3-part webinar where you can catch up on AI and get an idea what's going on, what might be coming down the pike for you.
So as we talk about AI, Ben and I wanted to offer a couple of practical use cases on how you can use AI. So I know when it first came out, I was a little at a loss. Like, how do I use this technology? How do I become more efficient and more effective using AI? And it just wasn't something that was intuitive or something that I thought to use on a regular basis. So the more I heard about how other people were using AI, the more it was easy for me to say, oh, I should leverage that as a tool. And when we think about AI, we don't want to think AI is not going to take over jobs, but it should take over tasks that we are doing that are manual and we don't need to necessarily be doing ourselves. Or if it's not taking over a task, it can make us more effective or more efficient in completing a task. So one of the ways that I leverage AI is using it to brainstorm. So if I'm in a group of people, it's easy for me to bounce ideas off of other people, but sometimes you need to brainstorm on your own. And so you can throw some ideas or a topic out there, a question that you have, and allow it to give you some responses to kind of help have that creative process. You can then respond to the prompt or what it gives you and ask more questions and almost have a conversation together like you would with a person to bounce ideas off of it. You can also use AI to summarize information. So if you have a long article, a presentation, something that you don't have time to read at the moment, you can throw it in there. It will give you a quick takeaway. Here's the key points or the summary. So you have that at your disposal and then later can go back and review the entire document if needed. Another way we can leverage AI is with policies. So if you're drafting a policy from scratch, you can use AI to get some examples or ideas or list of things you can include in a policy. If you have kind of an outline or framework of your policy, but need to kind of fill in the gaps or take bullet points and turn them into sentences, you can throw that into AI and have it kind of build out a policy from a framework that you've outlined. You can also ask it for information that you should consider to include in a policy. So when you're doing your annual policy review, as many of us do in the public sector, throw it out there. Say, hey, is there anything I'm missing from this policy? Or just ask, what should I be including in XYZ type of policy? And that will help you kind of check that there aren't additional things that you should be including. A lot of times when we think about AI, we think about words, right? So it's summarizing information, it's writing emails, it's writing policies, but we can also use it for non-word type activities. So many of us as finance professionals live in the world of Excel. Generative AI can be very helpful in writing Excel formulas. So if you have something you want to accomplish, you can't figure out how to write the formula to do it, ask Copilot, hey, how do I write a formula to do this? And it will give you an idea or write out the formula for you that you can kind of paste in there. If you have something that's not working in Excel, you can also throw that out there in Copilot and say, hey, I'm having this issue or this formula is not working. And it can help you with troubleshooting that issue. It's also really good at writing macros. So if you want to create an Excel macro book and don't know how to write the VBA language, it can be very helpful with that.
And I'll add to that and say I'm on the IT side of the house, so coding of any kind, right? So if you're in IT and you're looking at doing something and you need a PowerShell script that's going to go out and hit this many different machines with this kind of code, just tell it what you want, it'll spit it out. Please do not trust it explicitly because it can potentially not be doing exactly what you want, but it gives you a great head start. So we've talked about writing a little bit. Yes, you've heard in schools, you've heard in different maybe scholarship applications, other things that AI is becoming the way that students are creating their content. Obviously, there's a problem with that, but it can have good sides as well. So if you're trying to put together something, one thing I like to do a lot is say, all right, I need to provide a report on this, whatever it is. What are some key things that I want to make sure I include? Give me an outline, and it'll sit there and say, all right, you should talk about this, 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 this. And some of them may be things I didn't think of. So again, for that brainstorming piece, it's great. I have rewording on this slide as well. If you are one who comes across as harsh in email, for example, you can put an email together and you can tell AI, you know what, make this sound a little more empathetic. And it'll rewrite what you've written in a more empathetic way, or make this sound more professional. It'll do that. It's fantastic for that. AI can take notes. So if we're on a Zoom webinar right now, Teams has this as well. There's the Zoom AI summary, which will take notes of your entire meeting and action items and provide them to you at the end. Teams has their meeting recap feature, and that requires a premium license, but it can do the same thing. Other stuff that's out there, if you look at Microsoft 365 applications, Copilot is being built into most of Microsoft's stuff now. So you have Copilot built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, all this stuff. It is just like a little assistant, a little administrative assistant that's there as part of your application that you can use to make you more productive. So It is an additional license. If you haven't looked at it, it's at least worth considering. I would just caution that you don't necessarily want to turn it right on because there are a lot of data issues. Potentially, if you don't have your data locked down and Copilot has access to all your data, it may start giving users things that you didn't realize it could, like HR things. Make sure your stuff is locked down, please. But it is a very useful tool. It's great. Presentations, even this presentation, other presentations, you can use AI to bounce ideas off of, to help make sure your content is cleaned up. If you've got repetition, whatever, it can help you out with that. It's very useful. And as you get into the Microsoft 365 Copilot stuff with PowerPoint, it can do things like create images for you. It can help with your PowerPoint layout. It can do all this stuff. Very useful. AI in general is just a useful tool. One example, I've got it on the bottom of the slide. We've been interviewing candidates for lots of roles recently, and it is extremely useful to be able to say, here, AI, here's the job description. Here are some of the points this person had on their resume. Help me find gaps. Help me find what might be good interview questions for this person to uncover more. And it comes up with some very good ideas. So it's a useful tool that if you haven't been playing with, please start. All right, and with that, we're going to move on to polling question number 3, which is, has your organization published guidance and policies for how AI should and should not be used by staff to promote productivity while mitigating risk? Easy one, yes or no? And while you're answering that, we'll continue on. We're going to talk now about the technology stack. So we're talking about how to be more effective in your organization with technology. One key thing to refer to on that is the technology stack. So looking at what you've got, you want to identify inefficiencies. Everyone knows the easy one is hardware, right? If you've got old or outdated technology, it can slow down your whole operation. If you've got on-premises servers or storage infrastructures that are a bottleneck, maybe they just can't keep pace, maybe they're constantly grinding, but they can't do it, you're going to have problems. The same thing for endpoints. If you've got laptops with your users that are too old, too slow, maybe they don't have enough memory, maybe they're choked up with bloatware, whatever it is, you're going to cause productivity issues for your users. And as Aaron mentioned earlier with the example about, switching tasks and the time lost, same thing with productivity losses from slow hardware, slow equipment. If someone is waiting an extra 10 seconds for something they do regularly and they do that 1,000 times, it's adding up fast. So keep that in mind. Also with software, right? The operating system. If you're running Windows 10 or Windows 11, make sure you're on a current version of Windows 10 and 11. Some people don't realize that Microsoft releases updates to Windows 10 and 11 a couple of times a year, and the older updates go off support after a while. Make sure you're on the newest version. Just because you're on Windows 10 doesn't mean you're on a currently supported version of Windows 10. And your business line applications, of course. So are they optimized? Are they running on good enough hardware to keep them going powerfully strong and to make sure that they're responding to your end users without delay? And everything's moving to the cloud, right? We're talking about this. The future of most business line applications is cloud. Almost all vendors are looking at software as a service. They're seeing that as the future. They're moving people to that, which starts to bring up the question, do you even need a server anymore? So you've got all these pieces of hardware servers, you've got all these virtual machines running on them. Maybe you could be better suited by platform as a service or by going into apps like Microsoft 365 for some of your stuff. And let me get into that a little bit. So as you're looking at potential cloud migrations, you're talking about moving from a capital to an operational expense. A couple different ways to do that. Full serverless migration means I have all these servers at my office. They're doing all these things for me. I want to get rid of them. I'm going to go to Entra ID instead of Active Directory. I'm going to go to Intune policies instead of group policy. I'm no longer going to have file servers. I'm going to have all my files up in SharePoint where my users can use them and they can actually collaborate and get additional features they didn't have access to before. All that is great and usable. And we actually have a success story about that. We did one of our clients. There'll be a link in the presentation where you can read through what we did to take them from a server-based environment to serverless. Some people can't go full serverless. You may have to have a partial migration where you're in a hybrid environment. So you still have some servers and applications at your site. Maybe, for example, you have giant CAD drawings that it just doesn't make sense to pull them down from the cloud to your machines and back and forth if you do any kind of manufacturing. Or maybe you have stuff that you can't have in a cloud for policy reasons, whatever that is. That doesn't mean you have to have everything on site, right? You can be strategic. You can say, all right, we have to have these things on site. We need servers for these, but we're definitely going to have our email and some of our file shares up here in the cloud. We're definitely going to do that because of the productivity gains and the benefits. So now you're operating in a hybrid environment, and there's a lot of technology around to make that possible, and it could be good for your organization. So let's talk a bit about security ramifications and cybersecurity essentials. I mean, I know this is a productivity topic. Cybersecurity can have an impact on that. And let's talk about it a bit. So the basics of cybersecurity, most people know this stuff. You got to have backups, right? If you don't have backups, you are opening yourself up to a world of risk. As you look at what's out there from a ransomware perspective, what's out there from anything that could go wrong, if you don't have a backup to recover from, you can either be out of business, fired, whatever it might look like for your organization. That's key. Other stuff that's been around for a long time, antivirus, right? We've had antivirus in place forever. Does it do a good job? No, not really. Antivirus is a system where it looks for key things that it knows are out there already, and if it identifies that pattern, it blocks it. Problem is with AI and everything else that's going on now, new things are happening all the time. Keeping these pattern recognitions up to date is very, very difficult, which is where we get into, if you go down to the left counterclockwise, or endpoint detection and response, EDR. EDR is kind of like the next generation of antivirus. It can do what antivirus does, but it's also like a little AI engine living in your computer looking for things that are not normal. So whereas an antivirus can only look for things it's seen before, EDR can say, all right, I see that this application was installed and oh, look, it's starting to encrypt files. That's probably bad. I'm going to put a stop to that. It can take action too. It can put a stop to it and it can roll those files back and send a report saying, hey, this was what happened. This is how I stopped it. So just a far more intelligent way to protect your servers and workstations. Multi-factor authentication, we'll talk about that. That is a very basic thing. You'll see it out there. If you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled today, just do it. There's no reason in this day and age not to. And data loss prevention is another one. We're not seeing this as much, but it is becoming more and more common where people have to have DLP strategies in place to make it so that when data is about to go out the door, it's stopped. So we'll talk about a little bit of that in a minute as well. And key, of course, is security awareness training. If you're not training your users on how to detect things and stop them, things are going to get through. Why do we cover all that? Well, a lot of that comes into play when you look at cyber liability insurance. You have to have insurance these days, and insurance requirements are changing annually. So we're seeing things now that weren't in place 5 years ago that you have to have in your environment. Some things that we're seeing are they're requiring regular risk assessments and penetration testing. If you're not doing those on a regular basis, you can't be insured. Some insurance companies are saying you would have to go a step beyond that and have actual incident response plans, business continuity plans documented. How are you going to recover when you're hacked? You have to be able to demonstrate your security best practices. You can't just say, yeah, we do this thing. They're going to say, all right, good, prove it. And, data loss prevention systems, we talked about that. We're not seeing as much of that with insurance requirements, but I would say over the next 5 years, you're going to start seeing that required because it makes it much easier to determine exposure from a data loss event if you actually know what was lost. What should you be considering today? Well, security policies. Again, can you prove that you do what you say? Can you show that these are things that we take into consideration through our policies and that we do them? And we've talked about EDR already and some DLP. If you haven't looked into Microsoft Purview, that is another piece of Microsoft Cloud ecosystem that can help you with data loss prevention, allows you to categorize documents, label them, and keep track of what's going on so that you can be better protected. So if you haven't looked into that, I'll just put a plug out there and say, check it out.
Thanks, Ben. So as we talk about cybersecurity, I just want to remind us all that cyber incidents come in many shapes and forms. So when we hear that, I know my mind usually first goes to ransomware or phishing attacks, some of those more buzzwords. But there's other things like a fraudulent banking form getting emailed into your organization that also qualify as a cybersecurity event. And so when we think about these different types of events, we need to think about how are we mitigating the risk against each of those types of events. So when we look at cyber security insurance, that's one of the ways that we're mitigating risk. But when we think about that insurance, we also need to think very carefully about, is the coverage going to be available when we need it? So in order for this to effectively mitigate our risk, we need to be very careful on how we're responding to the attestations and questionnaires that are coming out. I know sitting in the CFO role, at times it has been my responsibility to fill out the annual renewal questionnaire for the insurance company. And there's often an IT component now that's very detailed and specific that needs to be filled out for that cyber insurance portion of the policy. So it's important that we're working with our IT professionals and making sure we're responding correctly and that our answers are true in all environments. So for example, if there's a question that says, do you have multi-factor authentication? And you think, well, yes, I have to use multi-factor authentication to get into my email. So we have that. But a data breach occurs and it happens in a part of your environment that didn't have multi-factor authentication. Potentially that could be an uncovered item because you had responded that you did have multi-factor authentication, but it wasn't true for the area where the breach occurred. And so that could be a reason that your insurance would deny coverage of a claim. We also want to think about reporting. So when cyber events happen, initially, we often don't know if they're a problem or not. So there might be something suspicious that gets reported by an user, and we have to take time to investigate that. And so when that investigation is complete, maybe it turns out to be an issue when initially we didn't think it was going to be an issue. And we may be outside of that timely reporting requirement by the time we find out an issue has occurred. So I've seen this happen at organizations where by the time they did an investigation and contacted the insurance, they were already outside of their reporting window. And so the insurance wouldn't have covered the incident had it ended up being a problem. And so make sure you know what that reporting requirement is. And if in doubt, we always recommend that you contact your insurance and make them aware of the issue. Usually there's no penalty for over-reporting. They usually will be grateful and thank you for contacting them. And then if something turns out to be an issue later, you're covered. Another thing you want to keep in mind to make sure that your coverage is going to be effective is knowing what's required based on the type of incident. So as a finance professional, I noted that fraudulent banking forms can be a type of cyber incident. And so depending on your insurance carrier, they likely have specific controls that are required when you're processing banking change forms. For example, MMRMA, I know many public sector organizations use them as their insurance carrier. I believe they have 3 specific controls that are acceptable for confirming banking information. So one is verbally confirming with a pre-authorized number. There's a specific code that you can have pre-identified with the vendor to approve changes. And if you don't use one of those change approval methods, then your insurance carrier won't cover a loss that happens due to that type of incident. A lot of times those controls aren't part of that nice annual policy renewal summary you get with your invoice. So make sure you're having conversations with their carrier, understanding the different type of incidents that can happen, what controls they require related to those incidents, what the reporting timelines are, so that when an event happens, you know exactly what you need to do and you have the appropriate controls in place so that your insurance will actually cover the event.
Okay, so why are we talking about all this cybersecurity stuff in a webinar on organizational effectiveness? Because the cost of any kind of incident that happens can be huge, right? If you are ransomware, for example, the average downtime is 2 weeks or more. You know, we've done several of these where we help clients get through a ransomware event. I don't think I've seen one yet where it's been less than 2 weeks. We've had some that go 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or more between initial discovery and when they're back up and running. And this is assuming that the backups are good. This is assuming that there's not a lot of other stuff going on. So the downtime is huge. If you think about how expensive it can be or how much of a burden it can place on your citizens, if, for example, if you're a municipality, it's huge. Revenue hit, reputation hit. Reputation hit is probably the one that most people don't think about enough. So if you are, especially if you are subject to mandatory disclosures, You are going to have to put it out there that we were hacked and this is how it happened and this is how it's not going to happen again. Most people can read between the lines and know if you are at fault, if you did a bad job. The reputation hit is real. So how do we prevent this? Security awareness training of your users is not talked about enough. So it's called the human firewall, right? You've got security awareness training going out there telling users, here's what you're looking for, here's how to avoid it, here's how to report it, and here's what you do to make sure that we are protected. And all of your user base needs to be trained this way. It can't just be certain people, it's got to be across the board. And honestly, training, once a year, having someone come in and give a little speech on how to identify a phishing email, not enough. You should be doing monthly trainings. You should be going through and saying, and it doesn't have to be a giant formal class. It can just be an online thing. But you need to make sure that people are constantly having reinforced how to protect themselves and the organization from attack. Incidents are usually people failings, not technology holes. Almost every major incident that's been reported in the news was not because there was a firewall that wasn't patched to the right level or there was something going on. It's that some person somewhere fell victim to attack. Either they clicked a phishing link in an email and put their credentials in, and that was the hole the attacker needed, or maybe they fell victim to a voice phishing attack where someone called into the environment and said, hey, I'm Bob Jones and I need to get access to this thing right now. And the help desk person is trying to be helpful and gives them access. Well, okay, that's another way to get in. These are things that can be prevented, mitigated through training. We do have a Cyber Month Hub link as well on the bottom of this slide. More resources on all things security. I'm going to direct you there to get more information. And here we are with polling question number 4. How often does your organization conduct mandatory security awareness training for employees? Go ahead and answer that, and we'll move on with the presentation. Here we go. Practical tips, things you can use today. As you're looking at your environment, doing a technology and procedure view on a regular basis is key to establishing where you are and how to move forward. So let's start with the technology review. What do you need to do, right? First thing you need to do is establish a baseline. If you don't know what you have, you don't know what you can improve. So you're going to look at your hardware, you're going to look at your software, you're going to look at your licensing, and you're going to inventory all of that so you can say, this is my digital, or this is my hardware estate. This is what I have. You're going to document your network infrastructure. You're going to talk about how things are connected to each other, especially if you're multiple locations. What kind of ISP circuits do we have? How are things connected? What's the speed? How are we locking things down? How can people get in with remote access? You want all that documented. If you're co-sourcing your stuff, if you're co-locating your stuff in a data center, make sure you've got documentation of how that's set up as well. And cloud is just a data center in the sky. Make sure that's documented as well. What kind of document collaboration solutions are in use? What kind of messaging solutions are in use? One thing that's missed quite often when establishing a baseline is doing an actual scan for vulnerabilities. It's great if you know everything that you have, but if you go through and do a vulnerability scan, penetration test, if possible, you're going to find out not just what you have, but what is misconfigured or what could be done better. And when I say a penetration test, don't just do an outside penetration test where you pay someone to try and hack into your network from the outside. Do an internal penetration test as well, where it takes it's like you have an internal person inside your network trying to break into things, because that happens more often than you think. Review your downtime, review your outage history. So you should be tracking every time that your network has gone down, every time you've had an outage, what caused it, how it can be done better. And then look at your IT spending, look at your budget. If you're not allocating money to fix these problems, they're just not going to get fixed. So take a look at what you have now and what you might need to do in the future. So next steps, sorry about that. Identify gaps and opportunities, right? As you're looking at your technology review, focus on where you have bottlenecks, where you can get the most use out of your licensing, especially your 365 licensing. There are a lot of things that you're paying for that you may not be using. Identify your cloud adoption strategy. Solicit end user feedback is key and huge. Not enough people do this. Go out to the actual user population and say, what are you experiencing? What's going on with you? How does this technology affect your working environment? And then consider emerging technologies. What's coming down the road that might be beneficial? We talked a little bit about AI. We've talked about some other things. And then develop a roadmap to take you from where you are now to where you need to go. As you're looking at technology review, policy and procedure review is the same kind of beast, right? You want to identify gaps and opportunities in your policies and procedures. The first thing you want to ask is, do you have an organized policies and procedure library? Do you have this stuff in place? Can users find it easily? Can they get to it? And then as you make changes, are you training your staff? Are you communicating all the changes? And are you regularly improving your policies? So just some examples of common policies that are out there that you want to make sure you have. Acceptable use policy is very common. Bring your own device policy. There are lots of templates out there. I've linked to the SANS Institute templates to give you a good starting point. You can go there and find information that you need, sample policies that you can use in your organization. Here we are with polling question number 5. How does your organization handle technology and policy and procedure management? So go ahead and select everything that applies in the poll, and we'll move on. All right, let's look forward a little bit.
Thanks, Ben. So as we've gone through this, we're hoping that you're starting to think more innovatively, more out of the box on how you can use and leverage technology. Things that weren't possible 2 to 3 years ago are possible today, and things that aren't possible today could very easily be possible next year or 2 to 3 years from now. So get out of the, this is the way we have to do it, this is the way we've always done it mindset. Get your staff out of those mindsets. There's usually more than one solution to any problem. And so think collaboratively, think as a team, and try to come up with different solutions on how you can do things better and more efficient. So this is a quick example. Electronic approval. So for audits, we used to have a piece of paper, right? And we would sign it. And how many of us are still signing physical pieces of paper and scanning and emailing them to each other? I'm not going to read each of these, but these are different ways that we can achieve a similar end result using forms of technology. So there's often a lot of different ways that we can use technology to be effective and accomplish the same goals. And again, looking ahead, many of us are moving from legacy on-premise solutions to cloud-based solutions. And those cloud-based solutions now give us a lot of opportunity for integration and automation. So we can integrate those cloud-based solutions with our payroll system, our accounts payable system, our electronic medical record. We can eliminate data entry between systems. We can also provide leaders with real-time information, dashboards, and reports to help them make more informed and effective decisions in a timely manner.
And we've talked about AI. It is out there on the horizon. Gartner did release their top technology trends in government report in April of this year. And under their realize risk, reimagine value, and evolve operations columns, what was interesting is that almost all of these have an AI component. So as you're looking, I mean, the big one that hit me, AI for decision intelligence. So by 2026, Gartner reports that over 70% of government agencies are going to be using AI to improve their decision making and service delivery. That is quite a change. And the other one with programmatic data management, right? Government leaders are demanding increased use of data for decision making, and they're saying that more than 60% of government organizations will prioritize investment in this kind of automation in 2026, up from 35% in 2022. So all kinds of things AI coming down the road, AI-driven intelligent applications that can learn and adapt are coming. Machine learning, analytics, and generative AI are going to just improve by leaps and bounds over the next few years. So keep watching for those. And let's have a quick review. So as we talked through over the last hour, we want to maximize our existing technology. We want to enhance productivity and drive efficiency. We want to look at our cybersecurity layout, and we want to future-proof with technology so that we're set for the future. Hopefully this was helpful today.
Thank you so much, Ben and Erin. I thought that was great personally. I hope everyone else got some great takeaways from that webinar as well. This concludes today's program. Thank you for joining us. We will be reaching out directly to answer any questions that were submitted through the Q&A. If you'd like to learn more, please visit Raymond's website at www.raymond.com. You can also email us directly at publicsector@raymond.com. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.